Hello everyone, this is Flight Sergeant Tang, and for this week's ground school class, we'll be covering 6.06 Loads and Load Factor. Here's an overview of our class. The four main teaching points are definitions, load factor changes, load factor in turn, and forces in a turn. So what is weight? Weight is a downward force due to gravity that acts opposed to lift. And this force acts through the center of gravity. What happens if weight is greater than lift? If weight is greater than lift, then the aircraft will descend. And vice versa, if lift is greater than weight, then the aircraft will ascend. Now what is loading? Loading is the gross weight of the aircraft divided by the area of lifting surfaces. To simplify this, gross weight is the total weight of the aircraft, and this includes fuel, passengers, or anything inside the plane. And when the total weight of the aircraft is divided by the area of lifting surfaces, which can be wings, this will result in load. And there are two types of load, live and dead load. Dead load is a load put on the aircraft when it is sitting on the ground. So weight due to gravity. And live load is additional loads added in flight due to acceleration or change of direction, and it's usually associated with maneuvers. To clarify this, live load is dead load, but added any additional load. So don't get confused that when live load is the only load that is experienced during acceleration or change in direction. Because what it is dead load added with any additional load. So now that we know what live load and dead load is, we're able to calculate the load factor. And the load factor is the ratio of the actual load acting on the wings to the gross weight of the plane. So the ratio is live load over dead load. And in straight level flight, the load factor is 1. So how does the load factor change? While the load factors increase, the aircraft is not in straight level flight. And any increase in load factor can be due to performing aircraft maneuvers, as we discussed before, like turns, or it can be associated with weather, like wind gusts or turbulence. So is loading a bad thing? No, but it could cause problems. And some of these problems is structural limitation. Each aircraft is designed with a max load factor, and if this is exceeded, then there will be permanent damage to the aircraft structurally. So here are two aircrafts that we have that we're extremely familiar in the Air Cadet program, the SGS-233A and the C-152. The glider that we use, the SGS-233A, has a max load of 4.67 Gs, while the C-152 has a max load of 4.4 Gs. And how does this affect stall speed? As the load factor increases, this also means that there's an increase in lift. And an increase in lift to maintain level flight will cause the stall speed to increase, as well as the speed to reach critical angle of attack. To talk about stalls, as well as how load factor affects the speed and reaching critical angle of attack, we'll be talking more about this in 6.07. So load factors in a turn. And we're going to talk about the relationship of the angle of bank to the load factor. As the angle of bank is increased in a turn, the load factor and the amount of lift required also increases. In the chart that we have in the bottom, the load factor increases exponentially with the angle of bank. And we can also see this in the chart that we have on our left. In an angle of bank of 15 degrees, the load factor will be 1.04 Gs, while the angle of bank of 30 degrees will have a load factor of 1.15 Gs. Angle of bank of 45 degrees will have a 1.41 load factor, and ultimately an angle of bank of 60 degrees will have a 2 Gs load factor. And in a turn, lift is divided into two components, vertical and horizontal. In the diagram that we have below, a straight level flight only have one component, which is the vertical. But when an aircraft is in a turn, there'll be two components, vertical and horizontal. Vertical component opposes weight, while the horizontal component causes the airplane to turn. This horizontal component is known as centripetal force. We'll talk about this more in the next slide. So centripetal force was what we talked about in our last slide. But below where the weight is, centrifugal force is the force that pulls the plane outside of the turn. And this can also be known as inertia, if you learned this in physics. And the resulting lift, due to added horizontal components, as well as the opposite of weight, this produces centripetal force, and this pulls the airplane into the center of the turn. To discuss the relationship of centripetal and centrifugal force, we're going to go to the next slide. Centripetal force pulls the object into the turn, while centrifugal force pushes you away from turn. Centripetal force is genuine force, so the aircraft is physically moving you outside of the into the turn, while centrifugal force is inertial force. We can experience centrifugal force when we're driving down the road. So while the car is making a turn, you can sometimes feel your body, especially in a sharp turn, moving outside of the turn. That movement of feeling that opposite direction of a turn is called centrifugal force. So now we're at our confirmation. If you guys have any paper or pen by your side, feel free to pause the video and write down what you think the answers are. Okay, now that you have it, I'm going to move on to the next slide, which are the answers for these two questions. And before we end, we have three more confirmation questions. The first one is labeling where the centripetal and centrifugal forces are. The two are word problems, asking when the aircraft is a 60-degree bank, how many G's is it experiencing, and when does an aircraft experience a 1G force? Again, feel free to pause the video and write down your answers. And here are the three answers for those three questions. If you do have any questions for this class, feel free to look back in the video. And if you still don't understand any concepts, you can always ask any ground school instructor and me. This was 6.06, loads and load factor, and thank you for watching.